Welcome back to another PT Pro from the Optimal Body Podcast. I'm Dr. Dom.
I'm DocJen.
And today we're going to be talking about ways that we think you can optimize your low back health, anywhere from mobility to strengthening to even what you're telling your mind about your low back. So let's dive into it. So I'm actually pretty excited for this episode because normally we're talking about some sort of diagnosis or something, but now we're just going to kind of give our tips on how we feel people can optimize their low back health. But this isn't all we do on this YouTube channel.
No.
Jen has so many other videos on specific pain points, exercises, mobility flows that can help with certain pain points. And we have a whole bunch more of these PT Pearls on all sorts of different topics. So before we dive in, why don't you hit that subscribe button and notification bell so that you can always be in the know on the new episodes that come out. We would love to have you with us. Now let's dive into how to optimize that low back health.
And this is going to kind of be something that we continue to do through different body parts.
The full body series. I'm calling it the full body series.
And in the past, we've gone through specifics on low back, whether you have a spasm that's coming up. We've talked about low back if you get pain walking long distances, should you do core exercises, disc herniations, like stenosis, scoliosis,
spondylolisthesis.
So many things. So you can scroll through all of our podcast episodes to see the individual one that you feel like you might need for your body. But we just want to talk if you're not even having pain, because we know that majority of people through life are going to have some episode of back pain, and most are going to have a reoccurring episode of low back pain. And this can range from you're waking up and you're like, what's that? To like, I can't even get out of bed, So let's talk about optimizing that low back health.
As a part of the full body series, I'm calling this part 1 of 3 on the back or on the spine specifically, because we're going to have episodes on low back, upper back, and neck, all that have kind of their own unique challenges.
Something that we just need to understand about the low back, though there's not a ton of movement as there would be in the hips or the upper back, there is still movement. There is still the ability to flex and extend and a little bit of rotation, not a lot, right? And so I think that's important to note, just because right away, when we talk about low back, the majority of what is told is that we have to stabilize. And though that is a component to it, right off the bat, we should not fear flexing, extending, and moving from the low back. We need to be able to understand, feel, and get stronger in all motions of the low back, not just controlling it from moving. And I think that's one of the main driving factors in what continues to drive pain, is people get so afraid of moving. Yeah,
fear avoidance behaviors is like one of the top risk factors for developing recurring or persistent low back pain.
How do I start to build in this control through my body? And that's where we start to talk about this dynamic core. And we actually have a whole pelvic floor foundations course that is basically your entire core. Because when we talk about the pelvic floor, it's your diaphragm over your pelvic floor and how that's moving with the front of our core, with the back of our core, and all through movement and patterning, right? And when I take a deep breath in, I'm hopefully, getting that diaphragm to start to move, which puts pressure down into my pelvic floor and everything starts to expand. And then I breathe out and everything reverses and that diaphragm comes up, that pelvic floor contracts, the core contracts front and back. And now when I move, I get all of these pressures happening, but maybe in a slightly different pattern, in a slightly different way. And through rotation, now my obliques are going to help to fire a little bit more, or through extension, my glutes are going to help and power me through, which are all part of our core. And so when we start to talk about this dynamic core, it's how do I use my internal breath, my intra-abdominal pressure system to help create that control and power as I'm doing, whether it's more neutral-based movements, rotation, flexion, extension, any type of movement that I'm doing within my body.
Yeah, I mean, and I love how you bring up that core is really anything from hips to shoulders.
Yeah.
And that's something we didn't bring up when we were talking about mobility, is the rib cage.
Yeah.
Essentially part of the thoracic spine, at least all the ribs are attached into the thoracic spine in some way. And so being able to expand and move through that rib cage as well can be so important, both to developing that dynamic core activity, but also supporting the low back, becoming mobile through the rib cage. If we start to become rigid in that low rib cage, one, we're going to find breath somewhere else and maybe be breathing up into our upper rib cage using more of our accessory muscles. But yes, mobility through the rib cage. And in developing that breath pattern and coming there first, I think is so important when we talk about then transitioning that into movement, because your breath is something you can always kind of come back to when you're in movement, and owning your breath in a certain movement is therefore being able to own and control that movement. And that's where I think that starting just with basic breath exercises to feel that rib cage, to feel that pelvic floor and diaphragm move, and then transitioning that to doing it with movement helps to start coordinate those movements. And there's so many different ways you can do that, all the way from supine exercises to then doing it in certain squats or lunges.
Supine he means on your back.
Yes, laying on your back and like doing the basics, like the heel taps and heel slides that you might get in a PT office. Essentially, for me, that is a great way to start utilizing the breath with hip movement to coordinate core activity.
Building that awareness.
While you're moving your hips, because that's where a lot of people start to lose it. I would ask everyone out there, like, if you're standing, try lifting your arms overhead without thinking. Just do it right now. Now, what does your low back do? What is your low back doing when you lift your arms overhead? In the past, for me, I would lift my arms overhead and I would flare my rib cage and have a lot of extension in my low back. To me, that's not a dynamically integrated core. Because as soon as you start moving some of those big limb movers, now this time our shoulders, we lose awareness of what our core is doing. Same thing for a lot of people if you suddenly march your legs up and down or go into a squat. Then do it again and pay attention to what your back does, right? Are we maintaining some integrity in that core as we do these other movements? And that can be a just quick test for you to realize, am I dynamically integrating core stability with other movements?
Okay, let's load up the body now. Let's get it moving under external load and putting more resilience and strength into the body. Yoga and all these things are so great for the body, especially the mind, right? But we have to build resilience of the body as well. And we do that through understanding how to move in all these different ways with a little bit more pressure on our system to build that strength and tolerance. Jefferson curls, which is holding a weight and rolling through your spine all the way down to the floor and then coming back up. And that scares a lot of people. But can you do it unweighted? Can we do it with no weight, and under control? Now use a little bit of weight. And when we start to progress the body gradually, we start to teach the brain and the tissues it is safe, it is resilient, and it is strong in all ranges of motion.
Yeah, there's like a whole, I feel like, group of people that will just take people straight to strength training because they're just like, okay, if we can just get people loading it up, loading their system, the pain will go away, the body will get strong, and they'll become more resilient people. I think every case is a little bit different. There are some people that might respond well to that type of a method. This is where we think, hey, maybe addressing some underlying mobility restrictions could be important first before we load through that mobility. And so, yeah, that's where we take the approach of more like, do some of the mobility, then can we actively control that mobility, and then can we start to integrate it in movements, and now can we load it all up and really strengthen. And, some of the main strengthening or functional based type exercises would be your squats, your lunges, your deadlifts, your pushes, pulls, and carries. And doing unloaded carries. Now as parents, like, how often are we walking around with our little Dante on one hip and walking through our day? Not too dissimilar to if you're holding a dumbbell or a kettlebell in one arm and walking around the gym and paying attention to how am I dynamically controlling through the core, doing like suitcase pickups where you just are bending down, picking up a dumbbell with one hand, lifting it up, setting it back down. Like, that's a certain type of squat or deadlift-ish exercise that's unbalanced. All of these types of things are essentially training ourselves in a more controlled environment, being the gym, for that variable environment being real life, where we're not paying as much attention to how we're moving, what we're doing, but we've prepped our body for it.
And if you want a plan to kind of follow and help guide you into how and where should you start and what should you focus on, especially if low back is part of your focus, if you feel it kind of getting achy or tensioning or just different sensations around the low back, I think that's where going into the low back plan on Gen Health can be so beneficial. Just try a free week, see what it's like, because when you start to understand all of these components and start putting them together, it doesn't have to take long. Like, I make sure that these days really only take you 8 to 15 minutes. And when you start to build this control, like I had someone just the other day, histories of lupus and pain and PT and all this stuff. And she said she was crying tears of joy because of going through the program and starting to open up this new awareness and control within her body, which is just so incredible, right?
Yeah.
And I've had other people who are like, oh my gosh, I did this mobility flow and my low back actually feels more tense. Oh, because you're moving into a new range that your body isn't used to. And this is where we talk about gaining that awareness first under control, so that then when I start to put on different loads, pick up kids in different ways, reach in the back seat and twist my body around, like I'm then not going to get all these different pains and sensations. So that's why doing things under control with your own body weight is so crucial to start building in first. And I think one last aspect that I just want to touch on real quick is the way we talk about what's going on in our back. This is huge. You're going to continue to have back pain if you say your back is bad.
Oh, my back's bad, or oh, I've got so many herniated discs, or oh, I've slipped a disc, or oh, my back is so badly degenerated, like, which might also be things you've been told. And if you've been told those things from providers, that's one of our pet peeves where we're just like, find a new provider. Because if there are still providers out there bringing x-rays or images into people's rooms saying, oh my gosh,
worst I've ever seen.
This is the worst spine I've ever seen. Like, I can't tell you how many patients I have seen who have had the worst spine their surgeon or their doctor who took a MRI or an x-ray has ever seen. I don't know if it's like just this scare tactic to get people to
do the surgery.
Comply with what you are then recommending after that. Like, I don't know the reason of talking to people that way, especially with the research we have now in these fear avoidance behaviors, putting fear into people based on how bad and unstable and degenerated their back is. Like, there are so many people out there that have the worst looking back or whatever joint on image that have no pain and that move really well. You know?
Or we've had people, like we had Andrew on the podcast who talked about having a 10 millimeter disc herniation, which that's big. Or Matt, even, he had 7 millimeter, I think.
Yeah, and they were both in very significant pain.
Very significant pain, and it took 6 months to a year to rehab. 6 months to a year, but no cortisone shot, no surgery, and 100% back to heavy lifting and living their life.
Yeah, Andrew was told by multiple people that he should never lift heavy again and should never lift again. And
he would have to have surgery in order to get out of pain.
And he's one of the strongest people we know. Most mobile people we know. And we've done podcasts with him on his experience as well. And so it's like, yeah, great point to bring up. Don't let anyone tell you your back is bad or your back is broken. Don't tell yourself, please. And then, yes, don't tell yourself, because those messages will just continue to play into that biopsychosocial model of putting you more at risk for developing pain in the future, whether it's from avoiding a certain activity or when you go to do a movement, you lock up because you've told your body for so long that you can't. So important. And then just to add on to what you said about joining the low back plan and getting a free week, like joining that plan isn't just getting a low back plan. You're getting all 11 plans that come with the membership. And you can essentially
do monthly webinars.
Yes. And you can essentially do everything that we just talked about in this podcast. The low back plan will do a lot. It will help with the mobility in hips and upper back. It will help with activations in the hip and the core area. There's also a core plan with multiple phases that will help you develop more of that integrated and dynamic core control that we've been talking about. And then you can move on to a full body low impact plan that will help you load up and start to strengthen basically everything we've talked about in 3 separate plans that if you work through those 3 plans, it'll take you 7 months, 8 months. I'd be hard pressed if you weren't feeling different in your body.
Exactly. And we're here to help guide you as well. But
and you can use code OPTIMAL to get a discount.
But I just want to guide, if you have been experiencing low back spasms, episode 246, if you feel like, well, I've always been told to just do planks and core exercises for my low back pain, go listen to episode 236 to dive a little bit more into that. If you feel like you've thrown out your back or your fear of throwing out your back because of what you feel, episode 230 will help understand and break that down a bit. And then if really disc herniations, that's so popular, right? So episode 124, it's actually quite an old episode, but talks a lot about the statistics of low back pain and disc herniations and what that all means and what you can do. So lots of episodes, and then there's so many more back episodes that we've talked about too.
Well, and like the two people and one other I thought of, like if you look up Andrew Diedelbach, we did a podcast with him on his experience. Matt Hall, who was a professional baseball player, also his experience with debilitating low back pain, and Steffi Cohen, who has set dozens of world records as being one of the strongest women in the world, and her experience with debilitating back pain. She was one of our very first interviews.
Who definitely has the strongest core I've ever seen, and has had huge episodes of back pain. So definitely listen to all those.
Hopefully you got a few little tidbits from this on something you can start paying attention to or working on to optimize your low back health.
Thanks so much for joining us. I hope you gained a little bit of insight, things you wouldn't have thought about if you had a light bulb moment. Let us know in the comments below. We want to hear from you. What have you learned? What else do you need help on? What other body areas? Let us know, and don't forget to hit that subscribe and notification bell so you don't miss out on any in the future.